So I will start. I'm Lisa. I am the talent manager at Fishbrain. And I will be the moderator tonight, so I'll be asking the questions. But yeah, I just want to say I'm super excited for this panel and this conversation because we are in, I think, one of the best times to be in HR right now. We finally get the role and the credit for being designers and creators and really making a difference in something that impacts everybody's lives every single day for most of their day. So it's so super cool that we're all here and interested in really making some really impactful things. But yeah, I will let the rest of the panel introduce themselves.
All right. So Johanna, I'm heading HR in Starbreeze, which is a game company. I started there 3 years ago when we were 100 people. Now we're 600 people. So we've grown rapidly. And now we're facing a different situation because we're in a reconstruction. So now we're ramping down. So employee experience is definitely something we work with every day.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Helena Sjöberg, and I'm the HR lead for Microsoft Sweden. So I guess we've been around for a while, at least if we look in terms of the tech business. I think it's super easy for us, and I also think, in all honesty, that we have had, from time to time, been a little bit fat and happy from a Microsoft perspective. So I'm all for sort of rejuvenating our own view on how to approach employee experience. So the Microsoft business in Sweden is quite big, but I mean, in terms of numbers, that is not interesting, but in terms of people, maybe 600 people on sort of the payroll in Sweden. And altogether, on a global scale, we are like 128,000 or something. So good, and I'm super happy to be here.
My name is Gwenda. I head up the recruitment function at iZettle. So we're not quite at fat and happy yet, but we've gone through some massive growth since we've been around, and I think that's really important for the both candidate and employee journey overall, because as an organization changes, how the people that are there and you bring in perceive that evolves. So keeping an eye on that and how that is shaped and designed, as Lisa said, I think is really important.
Hi everyone, my name is Maya. I head up HR at Mojang, a game studio, mostly known for the game Minecraft. Also a minimal integrated studio and owned by Microsoft, so I better watch what I say here.
You always watch when HR is here, right?
Yes. Also scary to be in a room with other experts. But we are about 150 people in the studio in Stockholm. We also have a sister studio in Seattle. We are currently, I joined as the first HR person, so that's also very interesting. Been there for a year. Yeah, happy to be here.
Cool.
Yep.
Thank you. So I'm just going to dive into it and ask some questions. And this first one is more for all of us to participate. So putting in the context of employee experience and designing for it and understanding there's a lot of unconscious moments that we take in throughout our day. What does good candidate and employee experience look like?
I can dive in first. So I think, broad question, of course, but if I were to sort of say what we try to figure out at Microsoft is about if you talk about the candidate experience, which is, of course, where it all starts, right? That needs to be sort of speedy. I think sometimes we fail, but it's that kind of speediness in terms of manage expectations, don't oversell the job, to be clear in terms of what the process looks like and blah, blah, blah. We probably all know that, but it's equally important to really focus on that. And in Microsoft, we have a totally centralized recruiting organization. So it doesn't sit sort of within my control. So in my HR job, I need to be super clear in terms of how to manage my own expectations, how to be really clear with the other, the talent organization, and to be clear on what are the needs for Sweden and how can we sort of keep the ear on the ground and fish where we need to fish from a talent acquisition perspective. Then from an employee perspective, of course, what's on all our minds, and that is a buzzword, but still important, is the inclusive culture. And that could never ever be sort of a job that is done. So for me, if we really focus on the inclusive culture and make it concrete on a daily basis, that for me is what nails it. If we talk about the employee experience.
Cool. Anyone else want to?
So I think there's some really interesting points that came up and that you addressed, depending on how HR is organized within a company, and we've all seen it. We've all seen different models. We're moving from this idea of candidate experience, which has been around for a long time, to employee experience, which starts potentially even before a person becomes a candidate, to after they've left an organization, and they can still be an ambassador for your brand and for your workplace. And depending on how HR is organized with a centralized talent org, with a local generalist, etc., we will face challenges in giving consistency to that experience. So is the narrative the same one when you speak to a talent acquisition team, when you actually start and you face, your first settling in, getting ramped up, onboarding to exit? Does that feel like the same place you're working at and the same team you're speaking with? And often that is, I think, where we face challenges today.
Agree.
And I can also fill in that, that's super important. And also as the company grows, like if you start in a company and there, like when I started in Starbase, we were 100 people and now we're 600. It's not really the same company, and still keeping that employee experience alive during that process is something to think of also. A challenge that HR faces.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all your points in terms of inclusion and understanding where you are as an organization. But also, I think what we're stepping into now today is understanding the human experience and the human experience at work, and designing around that, knowing that we are emotional beings and things do happen to us. And really looking outside of just a profession and taking in, okay, so this iPhone is something that's more or less glued to me and has been like perfectly designed. And why is that? And thinking about how do we design our processes within our company designed for people to do their best. I think that's where good candidate experience and employee experience starts, is understanding who you are as a person and how do humans react to the environment that they're in and in the process. And I think one of the greatest things too is clarity. That's something that a lot of people strive for. And as soon as you both are on the same page, it's easy to kind of understand where you're going.
And on that note, I think, more than once, of course, you've had that kind of scenario where the hiring manager gets super excited and really sort of oversells the job, or is not clear in terms. So you get that kind of misperception in terms of the expectations. And I think that is so easily because, you also want to achieve that kind of ambassador feeling, and you are proud working at Microsoft, but you also have to be sort of realistic in terms of what is this job about and what is needed and how can we help you on this journey.
Yes. And I think really defining within your organization, what does this experience mean? What does it mean to be a fish brainer? What is it? And for our organization and within people and culture, something that really helped us was to define our mission. What does it mean that we're trying to deliver? And for us, we want to make fish brain the best catch inside and out. So it's also incorporating your culture into this design and this experience. Like, what makes you, talking about EVP and all that stuff, but still designing things exactly of how is the human journey and what is actually reality versus just selling. Cool. Great. Johanna, I have a question for you. In terms of your experience and what's going on in Starbreeze, what steps can people take in the room to improve their candidate experience and job acceptance rates?
We struggled a bit, especially a few years ago when Starbreeze, in the game industry, I think some of you might recognize that the candidates, they're not always there for the employer, they're there because they want to work on this game. So they're super excited. People came to us I want to work on Payday. It's like a bank robber game. So they're I want to make guns. It's okay. So people weren't really aware of what Starbreeze as an employer. So that's something we worked with, defining, the values, trying to get them incorporated in in the ads and so on. So we filtered through the right candidates. But at the final step, because we recruited so much from other locations as well, so we flew them in for the final interview to get to meet the team, to get to see the office and get the feel of the company. And then as a final kind of thing in the interview was that I always, if the manager, of course, agreed, but that was maybe 95% of the cases, I gave them an offer on the spot in the office.
Okay, nice.
So they left the office, with the actual contract in their hand. Some signed, some didn't. But most people signed like when they got home and had the thought through and talked to the wife or husband afterwards. But that was a really, really good thing for us, at least, to get the acceptance rate up.
What was your biggest challenge?
I think to find the right candidates to start with. Especially for some roles, which are very, very difficult. But when they got into the office, most people wanted to start. So that's kind of when they realized this is a place I want to work at.
Nice. Do you guys have any interesting challenges that you usually face? I mean, is it based upon salary or is it cultural fit? Or is there anything within your experience that has made job acceptance rates not exactly what you desired?
I mean, the comp conversation is always going to be there, and that can then vary. You have a comp philosophy, different companies, different ways of doing things. So I think that's one that's never going to go away, and depending on which org you are. So that one I would actually take out. I think it boils down to how are you managing, your candidates and your business expectations. So in my opinion, you shouldn't probably have somebody interview with seven different people, crossing your fingers that they'll accept an offer at the end, although you're kind of on the bench about comp. You should have that conversation. You should be transparent, because if this person doesn't accept today, they might in a year's time, or you can come back to that. But comp is not necessarily a piece. What I think we need to get better at overall, and this is my, as a TA professional, we need to get better at understanding what drives the people we're speaking to. So why would somebody come and work at iZettle, for example, with, we're a very purpose-driven organization. There is a very entrepreneurial spirit to our customers, and it's something that is deeply ingrained in our DNA as a company. That's maybe not for everyone, and that's okay. We shouldn't push people through just for the sake of trying to hire them, if that's not what's going to make them tick and thrive and be happy at work, and then make a positive employee experience throughout the whole journey. So taking a little bit more time to understand what will make somebody say yes, and being transparent about that will then improve, I think, your acceptance rates at the end.
Fantastic. I think that kind of leads into the next question on how were you able to maintain the growth at iZettle, which was scaling pretty quickly, and maybe you can talk a little bit about those challenges and what has aided you through that process.
So I've been at iZettle for 6 months, so I can talk about the last 6 months, to be fair. But I have gotten a bit of a feel of what the growth process has been. I think there is a very strong sense of belonging in the organization, and of pride in what we do, and of purpose. And for me, that is really important. It's something that we, as the TA team, articulate very clearly when we speak to people. There is a reason why we walk in the door every morning, whether you're finance, engineering, HR, legal. We're there to make small business owners' life easier. And that's what we all need to strive towards as a common goal. So identifying people with whom that mission resonates, I think, has been a big part of making a successful, or going through a successful growth, rather than just pushing in the people to have bums on seats, if I can be a bit crude about it.
Yeah. And a quick build on, can I ask a question?
It's
sort of the how, in terms of the concrete tips, sort of how do you get that sort of trickle-down effect? And that kind of, I know it's Monday morning and I know why I opened the door.
Yeah.
Sort of.
I think
the how.
The how, how you communicate that internally.
How you get to that point.
As an organization, I think there are various things. It's about articulating your mission very clearly and your vision. It's about then more easily for us, I guess, here in Sweden, we're biggest office. You go down and buy a sandwich at lunch. The person who's selling you the sandwich has an iZettle reader. You go, darn, I helped make this. I helped make, So you close the loop. And that, I think, I get really proud every time I walk into a store and pay on an iZettle reader. I think that's great. I was like, okay, this is part of what I helped make, or hire the people who helped make this. And so really celebrating those successes of our, what we call merchants, our customers, showcasing it. We've had some fantastic campaigns around the self-made, which is the entrepreneur that uses iZettle products. I think sharing that within the organization is a very strong message around why we're here.
Cool, lovely. Yeah, I would say for Fishbrain, in terms of us growing, it's quite niched. We don't have everyone that's like a fisherman and that's just the most eager angler developer. It doesn't always happen like that, unfortunately. But I think for us, it is really showcasing our culture and showcasing why are we proud to be here and what are we doing that is technically interesting and what is driving you forward. I mean, I don't know if it's obvious or not, but I'm not an angler. But what really drives me at our company is the ability to be creative and experiment and bring that forward and have like your part. And it's a different, I mean, everyone has to define that. And it's all a different journey for all of us, depending on what stage of company you're at and your needs. So it is really tricky. It is really tricky to like define that. Cool. Well, I'm going to move on to the next part. So now that it's about attracting talent and getting them in the door and getting them part of buying our story and what we have to offer, how do we retain them? It's the crucial part of engaging them and making sure that they have the ability to learn and grow and progress. So Helena, what steps have you taken at your company to provide learning and development for employees?
So I think at Microsoft we are sort of blessed with a lot of investments in terms of learnings, but I also think that sometimes it's a little bit of a curse because we get so much on the smorgasbord in terms of learning opportunities if you talk about trainings and courses. So what I realized entering the organization like 4 years back in time, and I used to work at American Express, also big global American company, but not with that kind of heavy investment in terms of learning. So back then, I could sort of wave with a little sort of something to eat and look, here we have a training and then people come running. At Microsoft, no one came running if I were sort of showcasing that you would get a free lunch as well. So that actually made us really think of, what's the relevance, how to really tie in that kind of 2-hour investment in terms of the daily job, how this person can link that to his or her own employability piece. Because for me, entering the tech world, not knowing that much about it, has created tons of curiosity in terms of what is happening. So for example, I listen to like Digitala Draken or Digitalpodden or whatever. I would never ever 4 years back in time listen to those pods. And I want to, so what we talk about in the leadership team, is how can we create that kind of pull versus push approach? Because there is so much on the plate. It's so easy to feel that this is a mandatory training. I just tick the box and I click through. What if we can really, really make it more of a, this is for you to figure out what is needed. This is for you to understand how this links to your own employability. And it's not done over the night, and we still have a journey, to go on. But for me, it's so critical. So we talk a lot about this. And we have a new GM since a couple of months back in time, Helene Barnikov, and she's really, really behind this kind of pull versus push approach. So I'm optimistic in terms of that we can create that kind of spirit of I want to learn for myself, and this is how I learn. And I take the opportunity working at Microsoft to really sort of pinpoint the most relevant trainings and opportunities.
Yeah, I would say definitely. I'm curious about for smaller organizations. Like I know sometimes it's like a one-man show of creating your HR. So how do you? I mean, especially Maya. How do you tackle that at Moyang? I mean, you guys have really healthy retention rates. So how is that incorporated with your learning development, and how do you do that?
Yeah, we do. we try to invest as much as possible, of course, in learning and development, and we have a very generous education budget where we employees we now we try to niche it a little bit and ensure that everyone has a development plan, and also that the budget that they do have is linked to that education. But basically, it is also a lot of up to the employee what they want to choose that to, and that has been very good for our retention as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm curious as in terms of where do you guys get your inspiration? Like, so yes, the old standard was 70, 20, 10 in terms of distributing your learning. But now it's more about blended learning and how do you encourage / develop that, or think of like what's a good structure for your own company? I don't know if you guys have inspiration from anywhere or just say, that one works.
I think, of course, like learning on the job is super important, and we are quite a small studio as well, and it's important to have we have, of course, like top talent, and you need to retain those people. What was the question?
I was just curious where you get your inspiration from.
Yeah.
Like, how do you understand like what's good for your organization in terms of your learning development like structure? Like, I mean, it's fine because it's not easy. Like, I mean, for myself, like I take a lot of inspiration on like what's going on in different industries, like what's going on in the market industry and how do they learn. And there's a lot going on with like creative industries and establishing how they incorporate their own employees to do like a lunch and learn, or I know Warby Parker does WarbyCon, where each of their like, employees like pick a slot and like tell them about this is what I do and this is to learn something.
Yeah, we have every Monday Monday morning meetings where we do have team presentations, which is really good because then every team kind of rotates and talk about like what they're actually working on, and that gives like a good insight to like what's going on. And then we have like demo Fridays, which also been very, very good, where like the games teams shows what they're working on, and other teams as well.
Cool. So I guess leading into the next question about like retention rates, like how do you prepare for the current like work environment where people just don't stay very long? It's usually like a 2-year turnover. So how do you prepare for that within your organization or anybody?
Yeah, I think it's still to look at actually try and retain the top talent that you have. I think that's definitely a start, and pinpoint the people that you do want to stay and then invest in them. But of course, then it is to have some sort of succession plan as well in place, and that is absolutely something that, especially like if you're a smaller company as well, that you can be more or less vulnerable in that. So I think that type of having the next person that can step in if anything would to happen, but also try to not be put in that place in the first.
Cool. I'm curious in terms of like your larger organizations, like how, I mean, obviously you're not able to see everybody and have a personal conversation every day, but how does that work on any of these scales?
I'm thinking it's, from my experience, it's lots about talking about the expectations, because I know young people, they want to take the next step within 6 months, and then the next step, so they want to be a senior within 2 years. So it's very much about talking of what's expected to become a senior or take the next step. So it sets, I would say, a higher demand on the leaders or the managers to have those conversations and be clear. So career steps or career paths, it's quite important. It doesn't have to be super structured. Like in Starbreeze, we wouldn't be able to structure everything because the managers' leads wouldn't follow it. So it's a fine path there.
And I think a learning for us would be that we have in the past been a bit too structured, I think, in terms of the succession slates and also the attempt to manage expectations. But also, I think we have to challenge ourselves, like this is a bet we can take. We should take this bet. We can ramp. We can help this person. Let's try out to a greater extent, at least, than Microsoft has done in the past. So it's been a lot about the structure and the succession planning. But what we have forgotten sometimes is sort of to really tell that person that you are on the succession slate. Are you fine with this? What will you ship in? How will you what steps are needed in your view to really take on that sort of next role or the role after that? So it definitely goes both ways.
Yeah.
I think there are a couple of things, and specifically when I think of smaller organizations that are scaling or have scaled, I'm going to say the really boring thing, which is data.
Yeah.
So you said, people typically stay for around 2 years. Okay, but do you know that about your organization? And is that the case for all your teams, or are there pockets of, higher turnover, longer stayers, etc.? So how do you actually understand your organization more than just, I think, more or less? And so that would be the starting point, which is typically one of the challenges that scaling orgs have, is you're trying to ramp up, you're trying to hire, you're trying to do all of these things. When do you step back and go, how do I actually get an overall picture of what's happening in my company?
This is where Microsoft can help you.
Isn't she wonderful? And then the other thing is, and you guys were talking about this, it's, career paths, yes, but I think there's also more and more conversations around what can recognition be, because it does tie to that. That doesn't necessarily need to be a linear career progression path, but how do you recognize performance? How do you recognize people doing a good job in different ways and open that conversation up a little bit more horizontally, I guess, rather than just vertically?
Yeah, I think that's definitely like hitting the nail on the head, is in terms of like the communication and allowing data to help you and enable you, but not relying on it necessarily. And Helena, I think you made a really strong point about having that conversation of whether you are, these are the plans we have for you. I'm sorry, did you want to be involved in that decision? Which leads me to the next question about maintaining good communication between offices, and how do you do that at Microsoft?
So I think it's been quite clear, because what I entered was a quite local sub, and so much thing has happened through the last years, where sort of we're in the middle of some kind of big ecosystem, much more than we were in the past. So I think it's about really challenging the local mindset in terms of letting go. So it's not about us against Western Europe or Corp or so. So it's about that kind of challenging mindset that we really need to stick, to ourselves and to challenge ourselves with. And I, if I were to pitch any Microsoft collaboration tools, I would pitch Teams, which I then do, because that is really a super way of collaborating in a sort of, as we think at least, quick way. And I would just like to bring it up, because we eat our own dog food, of course, and we really failed miserably in the past in terms of how we actually roll it out, both probably by customers, but also internally. So we sort of roll out something and then we just leave people with what is this? But with Teams, we really were intentional. So we had this kind of 1 week of internal lunch, meetings, and we were really giving ourselves that kind of week of testing it ourselves. And then now we go all in. So we sort of left the Snuttefield Skype for business and are all for Teams now. So I think sticking on to sort of one thing and try to align and use the same.
Yes.
Would definitely help us, at least, with the collaboration piece, no matter where we sit in the world.
Really interesting. I think something that's also interesting is understanding how organizations work with their communication platforms. Sometimes Slack can be the best thing in the world, and sometimes it's really the worst thing in the world. Do you have any examples of it hindering your ability or the organization in terms of the culture, communication platforms helping or hindering?
I think we use Slack, which is very, very good. But I think it's a matter of, creating the right channel so people know in what channel do I post what posts. So we have something, random. You can post anything. Yeah. But you don't want to post the, global news in that one, because then not the right people might look at it. So I think it's a little bit of an educational part to it.
Yeah. How to incorporate it really
exactly
in culture.
Yeah. Definitely the same thing for us. I think we had just a funny story, but our IT manager did post like an important message in our Slack channel that like the office, like it was going to be closed like over the weekend or something like that, and that was just like missed by all employees. So I think sometimes it can be overused.
Yes.
So it needs to find like a good balance on how to communicate. And sometimes email is easier as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think for me it's all because one of the leadership principles that we all sort of should adhere to, and this is nothing fancy, we probably all have it more or less, but it's about creative clarity. And I think in Microsoft there's so much stimuli, so we need to take every damn opportunity to really communicate and sort of connect the dots. So if you talk about an all hands or a one-on-one meeting or a coffee machine sort of 5-minute chat, just to be sort of intentional about how can I help out to drive that kind of clarity in terms of my role or what I know or who I have in front of me. So it's about that kind of daily thinking about to be more intentional to drive the clarity.
Cool. Great. So one of the other topics of tonight besides employee experience is the future of work. And what does it look like? So anyone want to start?
I think from my experience when talking to candidates and employees, they would like to be able to work from home every now and then and not have to come into work and sit there. Unfortunately, for many of our roles, they have stationary computers, so they have to come into work. But for the roles that can work from home or distance somewhere else, we're open to it. And I think that's going to be crucial to be able to offer that, to work from home or somewhere else, to retain the right people.
Kind of finding that balance. I think we struggle a lot as well, because like previously we might have given a little bit too much freedom and that in the end like didn't really work, and then we needed to have some more like guidelines, and that was not appreciated either. So it's like we struggle to find that balance. I think as long as you have like you can manage expectations and you know like what your role is, I think you can manage your work from everywhere. I think it's very important to give that flexibility.
But I think that also ties into, to some extent, the type of leadership you have in your org, because remote work and a lot of freedom reposes on a lot of accountability from the people doing that. So you know, we were having this conversation just before. You know, when you hand something over, if I don't hear anything, no news is good news. It's it's on track. I don't need to be able to drop by your desk and go, "Are you done?"
Yeah.
So I think it requires an organization of trust and accountability to be able to give that flexibility as well, and that is a big challenge from a culture perspective, I think, and a leadership perspective to build.
Yeah, I definitely think the environment that we're working in is drastically going to change in terms of understanding ourselves as human beings and how do we function and how do we disperse our energy throughout the day, how do we lead from a neurological standpoint and understanding like our brain only has so much capacity and energy to take in this information, and when is the most optimal times to do things. I mean, neuroscience is leaps and bounds, and you've probably seen so many reports in the next 10 years, like it's just going to go out of control in terms of the research that they find. And I don't think that is a total separate side to how we work and how we understand environments. So I think where the future of work is going is understanding more and more how to optimize your environment for work. And yes, it's not every company is going to be able to utilize that, but I think we'll find more and more impactful skills and understanding who we are as human beings, and from air quality. I mean, all that stuff is kind of existing now, but how do you see in a holistic perspective? And when you come into like designing your experience, you need input. You need input of what's going on. And I don't see necessarily the employee experience as a product, but it is going to be consumed by somebody by the end. There is an end user. So there are a lot of things that we need to think about in terms of what makes a happy workplace, what makes it a functioning place for human beings, and does it make you tired? That's where I think the direction is going. We will see more and more of that technology entering our space, and Also, of course, AI and machine learning is like coming in. But the thing that's really nice about that, I think we talked about earlier, is we still want to do so much innovation and creativity, but there's only so much time because you're stuck behind a lot of admin. And so I think for the future for us, we really get to incorporate so much more of other industries and then really start to be like the innovators in the industry. Woo! Yay! Woo! Yeah. Yay, HR!
I was like, I hope so.
Yeah, you're like, yes, yes.
To sort of build on that kind of how on earth to add the perspectives in the organization, how on an sort of in an agile way
Yes.
on a daily basis really build on all that kind of innovation we have in a big company like Microsoft, but also in smaller ones.
Yeah.
And I would say like sort of one tip, and you potentially have tried out it, but it really works well, at least for us, would be that kind of reverse mentoring setup. And I actually talked about this in another event, and then someone at the backside sort of, why do you call it reverse mentorship? And what I mean, by the way, is that we sort of match trainees with the leadership team. So the trainee would be the mentor, and the person from the leadership team is the mentee. But then I got this super valid question from the audience. Why do you call it reverse mentoring? And I think that really stuck with me in terms of, that's one way of mentoring. It's not that kind of reverse, we make it special, we don't really think about it as a mentorship. So that really made me think, and now actually we call it sort of the one way of mentoring, also in Microsoft. But I think that kind of, those learnings I have had from my mentor, and we've done this now in 3 rounds, and really evaluated and fine-tuned sort of the setup and the length and how to match and blah, blah. But it really helps me to get new perspectives. And also sort of it goes, 2 ways. So that's one quite concrete thing to implement, no matter sort of how big the organization is. Well, at least you have to have 2 people in the organization of course, to put in place. But it's a good way to just inject and to get new perspectives and to sort of be agile.
I think that's really cool. And I think something that I see more and more is HR being able to work with marketing and how we are able to collaborate and not just see it's just, you only work on employer brand, or it's a holistic process. And something that I see for myself too is I sometimes don't feel like I'm as involved in the product side. And so I need to understand that more, and how do we collaborate, and how do we make that a full circle process within recruitment, and making sure people all have the understanding, the buy-in of like, what are we selling? What is this product that's going on? And I think we're more and more have the ability to collaborate and see that it's not just divisional departments. We are collectively creating this together. Yay! Yay! Somebody else says Cool. So that's all the questions I have on my paper. But I mean, is there something that we've missed that we feel like these lovely people should know about?
We want questions, I think.
Yeah.
Open up for questions.
Dead silence.
Yeah.
No, the person in the back.
Bam.
Do we really need to change? Just kidding.
From my personal opinion, I think it's more into this facilitation role and enabling people and feeling encouraged to and teach them how to facilitate and run teams and understand team dynamics. And something that I saw another speaker say before, it was like, HR is the new life coach, which which I kind of like, and then I kind of don't like. It seems like a lot of responsibility. But I think it is encompassing this idea, like, we're not just about work. It's also understanding you as a person totally, and understanding that you have a life, you have children, you have ambitions besides getting to the next ladder. So I think that's where HR as a function is going in terms of not being so siloed, and like I was talking before, in terms of more collaboration and not necessarily having these distinct lines of you do this and it's admin and it doesn't really bleed into what marketing does or what the product development is.
But I think that's a really good point, and it's not necessarily something that's new. It's something that keeps coming back, and I think some functions or some HR functions and some HR markets are more mature than others. But HR as a business enabler and not a pure, transactional support function. If we're not there yet, then that's definitely something we should get to, because the people we have, and that includes everyone in a company, they make the product, they market it, they sell it, they take it. So going from that siloed admin function of please, print out a contract to, or please read a CV, in my case.
Or 10,000.
Or 10,000. I think that's nothing particularly groundbreaking, but it's something we should keep front of mind every day.
Yeah.
How do we get more embedded, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think what you pointed out earlier would be sort of the data, how to translate those into insights in order to really embed those in the business conversations. To sort of, it's not about staying as is. It's about, either go to the right or to the left, but this is like a business decision. This would be something that we are all accountable for. And to really, this is so floskel, but still, to really embed the people agenda into the business agenda. And I recall starting at Microsoft where sort of there were around the table HR questions sort of addressed, and everyone was looking at Helena, sort of, how can Helena solve this? And I was like, this is not Helena with a super limited HR, organization on the ground in Sweden to solve for, because then we will get nowhere. This is like a people decision. This is a people bet with potential trade-offs. So this would need to be a decision where we all understand and stand behind and make it trickle down. So it's about, I sort of be sometimes a little bit controversial, but I would like to erase the HR and sort of put people in there instead, because then you immediately get another kind of level of accountability in the organization.
I think you're so right on the terms of also it's not just a HR thing or people and culture or head of the department. You handle the culture things, or you handle the values. It's like, no. I think it's also learning about to spread that role of the culture also to the other stakeholders and the people, knowing that I don't own it, I help facilitate it.
But I also think like coaching the managers to carry out that work as well, because I feel as have been like the sole HR for quite some time, that has been like brought on me. But I'm like, okay, let's coach and mentor like the managers to actually carry out that, because it is the company message. So that is something that we will continue to do. Here we have questions.
Yay! You choose.
Let's start here, in the middle.
I just want to follow up
Yep.
on that conversation around maybe if you have an example of when you've had to say to your leadership team, hey, I'm one HR person, but we have a team of 60 or so. How do you push back and get and come together on that rather than them saying, yeah, but you're in HR, shouldn't you figure this out? Have you got any examples or ways in which you approach this?
Yeah, I honestly have to say, like, I feel like I push every day, but it's also like, it's also like, what is the worst thing that can happen? Like, of course, it's not life or death. So, like, I think a lot of times we can just like go back on what they, if they did say something that accidentally, okay, this was not okay. But it's more like also showing that you can do this, and that is just like giving them that type of support. So we can be like, just like from handling, moving someone from one team to another team, and I just like don't have to be in that type of conversation. But it's building a little bit of trust in themselves, I guess. Yeah.
One efficient way is to put the executive sponsors to different projects or to themes, because then that you get that kind of sane effect in terms of not everyone can sort of absorb to be the executive sponsor for everything. So they need sort of to commit to this would be sort of my really sort of theme that I have close to my heart, and this is why I can sponsor that together sort of in a partnership. So I think just being clear on we can't do everything, but this is what we think can be impactful from a people agenda perspective, and how do we support this from an aligned leadership team or extended leadership team perspective.
So I feel with the kind of the new generation, there's a greater demand for the consumer experience in the workplace. Like Lisa, you touched on marketing, and all of you've mentioned like managing expectations. So how do you meet those expectations in HR? Obviously, we have things like Slack and WeWork, LinkedIn, but are there any other ideas?
I would say it's not easy, especially like depending on the type of organization you are. And for myself, speaking from Fishbrain, we're a scale up, so we're changing in size, which means you change in culture. So the definition and the expectations are different as well. And especially when you grow so fast, it's usually in batches. So the last year we have doubled in size. So who we were then and who we are now, and the type of demands and needs are quite different. I think the way I approach it, I have a design thinking background, which is so we've been able to do almost like a customer journey of this life cycle of what's happening in the employee experience, and understanding sort of the mood curves of like, okay, when you first start, you're really stressed. It's a bit of anxiety. You don't know where to go, what to do. And so it's implementing those things. There's some things that are just fundamentally human about certain a standard of experience. But in terms of like making it like consumer grade, I think it depends sometimes on the resources you have and the tools that you can instill. But if you're like myself, where you want to be creative and try to create it on your own, there's just little touches. I feel like the way people have the best experiences is based on a lot of micro moments. So for me, one thing way I think about it, and especially we have a lot of international candidates, so that's a whole nother layer in terms of getting integrated and understanding Sweden. And so they're taking these little pebbles of each micro moment in terms of like, okay, that was great. No, that was fucking terrible. Like, that was great. Like, so like it creates these piles of like, yes, I want to stay, or no, I want to leave. And so for us, we don't have all the money in the world to like swag you out and like, do all those really cool things. But it was so simple for us to create a welcome letter that had a warm touch and say, hey, these are our people. This is your manager. These are the next 5 things, like you're saying, expectations. These are the next 5 things that are coming to you. That takes the anxiety out, is to know what you're going to expect. And then also, like, I think something that has really helped me and in my HR career is instilling laughter, instilling some sort of knowing that, okay, cool, like I can breathe a little bit, and knowing that it's okay to be yourself and welcome, and not everything is so tight and serious. So yeah, I mean, I've spoke mostly about like the onboarding experience, but it's taking that one chunk and knowing that, hey, I can recreate that through different parts of the employee experience. And will you get to it all? Absolutely not. And then working in an agile mindset, things have iterations of itself. So knowing that, okay, just get started. Let me just snap out like this welcome letter that will be the base ground. And then when you come a couple months later and be like, this information isn't quite relevant anymore. And then understanding, oh, this would be cute to add, all our dogs in the office. There's different layers and levels that you can add. And so it's understanding that it's not a one-time thing. It's ever evolving process. It's evolving with your organization, but it's also evolving in terms of where you have the capacity. Ta-da!
Especially now also these days where there is a short employer life cycle. Love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, sort of reflection is probably, and we've been on that topic already, but how to create that kind of safe environment for learning. And I recall when we, as many companies, sort of found this growth mindset word, and it quickly became a little bit of a buzzword internally, but still sort of it had this kind of element of taking risks. But then a couple of weeks later, it came from the top, from corporate, like we better put in sort of calculated risks, because just putting in risks, people go bananas. So we sort of have that kind of fine-tuning piece, but still what we think is so important is, of course, how can we really let people touch and feel and try and try again and learn from those mistakes. So I wouldn't say sort of we're there fully yet, but we really try to nail down that from a more concrete, what can we do in Sweden on a daily basis to create that kind of platform of trust where you can really try out. And if you fail, that is sort of fail fast and learn from that and showcase that more. So we've started at least to sort of talk about that, fail fika or whatever you could call it. But it's about starting to talk about it, starting to showcase it. Otherwise, it's just fluffy words. So that is one thing I would say.
Yeah, I would say in terms of agility and designing for that, so like programmers and product designers have worked in the Scrum style or in Kanban for a really long time. And I think it works twofold for you to adopt it within your own HR department. One, that you can speak a relatable language to other people that are working quite significantly within your organization. And then two, that enables you to have agility, because then you can break it down into pieces and being like, okay, well, all right, we definitely cannot concentrate on this week, and be able to move it around and understand like where is your capacity. I think that's a lot, or at least for my understanding, in terms of being in a smaller organization, it's a matter of capacity and ability to do it. And then for designing for learning, I mean, we're still only 60 people, so we have probably like Mojang, we have like a very generous like budget in terms of self-educating yourself, and it is very self-led. And I think there's a lot going in within the learning space in terms of blended learning, but it's still like a bridge we really have to cross and design for. And I think I don't know if you've noticed my message, has a lot to do with like design thinking, but it's the same in terms of really understanding where are you in that process and what are you capable to do. Yay!
So I guess that this is mostly towards Gwenda and Johanna. Talking about culture in a fast-growing organization, how have you been tackling that?
I think when starting looking at like a candidate experience, it's super important, as I think we mentioned before, to be clear about what is the culture. For example, in Starbreeze, it's very unstructured. So that's something we really try to express and try to get feedback from the candidates that they prefer an unstructured workplace. Because if they come and they really want to have the structure, they're not going to stay for long. So then it's going to be a mismatch. Same thing when they start, to also repeat those things and explain in the onboarding that this is the way we work. So I mean, it's not perfect, but it's honest. So I think honesty goes a very long way.
Yeah, how have you had the conversation like in terms of growing pains? There's like people that are like, oh, I love being 25 people, and then all of a sudden you're 100. So so I mean, how have you dealt with those type of conversations? Because I mean, they're drastically different cultures.
Yeah.
How have you dealt with that at your organization?
Do they have to be drastic different cultures though?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of processes, and sometimes like they're used to being like tapping you on the shoulder and getting the information, and that's just not possible anymore. You need to have a resource somewhere. And I think my experience sometimes has been like, oh, no, don't put rules on us. Don't make that into a policy. And it's like, no, it's not a policy.
It's a way of working.
It's a process to, I mean, but that's how I see it really though. It's a process to enable you to do the things that you need to do and be most creative, and not have to worry about finding 6 different people to have a consensus of what is the thing that we're supposed to do. But some people really like that. So I mean, have you had to have like hard talks in terms of like, I'm sorry, the organization is growing?
I think it's for us, it's come quite of natural. Some people did leave because we grew so fast. And they were used to, just walking over to the other person, and they knew everything all the time. And suddenly they had leads, or they had to go through a manager and a structure that they didn't prefer. And we as a company needed that structure. So sometimes you can't really kind of meet the expectation of the individual. So again, I think it's honesty and explaining and not trying to hide or like, yeah, I hear you, we're going to fix it.
Yeah.
If you're not intending to fix it. So
I still want to come back to that because I don't necessarily agree with the fact that size changes your core culture. It changes the way. So if you take culture as a very rough definition, which can be, the way we do things around here. Now, I don't know if growing fundamentally changes the way you do things around here. It can change the tools you use to do them. So, maybe you can't tap somebody on the shoulder, but that's when Slack comes in, which is the digital equivalent of tapping somebody on the shoulder. But yes, I think the first step is actually being able to put words on it. So what makes us who we are? How do we do things around here? What will make somebody happy and thrive in the way we do things around here? And then once you have that, even as you grow, you can actually, as you're saying, start, okay, well, we are, bigger, but unstructured. It's maybe who we are, and that's okay. And you can set those. You can set those expectations. You can be transparent about that. We are now over 700 people worldwide, and we still have, as I was saying, that idea of the entrepreneur in the spirit of what we do. 700 people, it's not a startup anymore, let's be frank. But that persists, and that's still the way people think and work, and you just need to find different ways of making that way we do things function for a bigger org. Now, growing pains, yes, always. And, the big thing is the word processes, and if it's like, oh, we're going corporate. Okay, yes, we are. No, okay, well, it's working agreements is what we call them now. That's okay. So there will be growing pains, but if you know what makes you you, then you can kind of try to accompany them into a larger world, I guess.
Everybody knows what they're doing. Yeah.
There we have one.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the future organization, HR. What kind of roles do you think will be needed in new HRs or skills? But the integration of HR, IT,
Yeah.
Chief magician. I don't know. I mean, I think it's more about like skills than it necessarily about roles, because I see it more of like a bleeding than more of like, oh, you do this one thing. But maybe it's because I'm speaking from a smaller organization where it's like that anyways. But for me, and what I see desirable in terms of HR in the future, and if I worked in a larger organization, is how do you work as a team, and how are you interpreting it as like a holistic system? And yes, there are certain parts that you'll be in charge of, but you work together to bring it as one. And that's how we view our department at Fishbrain. It's not just chief people and culture, talent manager, recruiter. We are people and culture, and how do we create this experience together? But in terms of like the type of roles that I think in the future will happen, it's already happening in terms of there's a lot of analytics involved. There's a lot of how to understand the data and how to make decisions from it. And I think there will be more roles in terms of someone that's really in charge of like the experience of being on site, and like what type of desks do we have, the air quality, like sunlight. There's so much about your human body that's affected unconsciously about what's going around you. And so for me, I think that's a really interesting avenue to be a specialist in that.
And I think it's so important to be able to influence others, right? We've been talking about that, how HR potential is not sort of touching it could be that I have to work through the talent organization, for example. And so it's for me a lot about understanding, identifying your stakeholders and manage both expectations, as we said 100 times today, but that is so core, but also sort of to make sure that you influence. And in order to influence, you have, of course, to be, clear, but added that kind of level of empathy, because I think that empathy part, it's so easily forgotten. So it's that kind of clarity together with empathy that I think can help you to really, influence where you need to influence. But I also think that that kind of less is more approach is so needed, because now we hear ourselves, we want to partner with marketing, we want to be everywhere, and that is not sustainable. We will have no impact whatsoever. So I think we have to just be sane to ourselves and to our profession, and to let go of stuff, and to be clear on where we want to have impact and work through others.
So I'd like to give a huge thanks to the panel, but also to say that we've set up some beers, some wine, some more food upstairs, so you're all welcome to stay and mingle and talk to the panel afterwards, talk to each other, see what you've all learned, and just feel free to stay here and learn from each other, because this is a great opportunity. There are a couple people from small, large, super big, and every single organization, and I think we can learn a lot from each other. So take this opportunity to really do that.
Ow!
All right. Work is always be like,